Hey guys, I'm Elizabeth McCravey, a website designer and business coach for entrepreneurs and your host for the Breakthrough Brand podcast, the show that's all about pulling back the curtain on how to actually build a successful business. I don't skim the surface around here. If you want a deep dive into the nitty-gritty details of what it takes to run a successful business and stand out in a crowd, you're in the right place. After creating a multiple six-figure-a-year website design business in my 20s, I'm ready to share everything I've learned and everything I'm still learning because I believe the keys to building a thriving business should never be a secret. Here you'll find episodes that are actionable, direct, and fun, like friends chatting business over coffee, and a fresh, honest take on the reality of being an entrepreneur. If you're ready to master online marketing, branding, website design, mindset, and business strategy, then this is the podcast for you. It's time to build your breakthrough brand. Let's do this. Hi friends, I'm back with another episode and really excited about the topic of calendaring, one of my favorite things to talk about today. I took a tiny hiatus from new episodes while I was traveling for work. It was my first time actually away from Colin since he's been born, which was really fun, but also hard in a lot of ways. And then lately, I just feel like Adam and I have had the craziest spring with a lot of overcommitting ourselves, but with all fun stuff. But I'm very glad, like as I'm recording this, to kind of be on the other side of all that. We hosted a family a ton of times. We hosted multiple parties and me traveling, him traveling, so much stuff. And the trip I just got back from that was my first time away from Colin. It was with Showit and it was so amazing. I'm going to share a tiny update from that right now before I get into the tips. If you're curious about it. So it was a designer retreat for design partners with Showit and their team. And they're doing this all year in small groups. So I was there with the May group and with about 10 other designers and then some of the Showit team. We started off the trip at Showit's headquarters, which was so cool to get to see and walk around and meet more of their team that I hadn't before. And then we went out to Show Low, Arizona, to a ranch. And we did things like obstacle courses, painting, axe throwing, a lot of sitting around and chatting. And we all did casual presentations where we taught each other like something business related that we feel like we're good at to everyone else. And Todd, the CEO of Showit, did some awesome presentations for us where I learned so much. That was so super fun. And it was just a beautiful trip. So it was fun being away. It was refreshing and it was hard being away from Colin, which is so interesting because before becoming a mom, I never really thought that like traveling away from your kid would be that hard, but it was harder than I thought. And I think too, the 5 days and 5 nights, I actually got home in the middle of the night. So it truly was like 5 full days away, 5 full nights away. I feel like that's the max time I'd want to be away right now. But it was good. It was refreshing to like kind of take off my mom hat a bit and really just soak up all the business fun, and hanging out with business friends who I don't get to see that often. And yeah, it was really wonderful. So that's what I've been up to when there have been 2 weeks off the podcast. And now to get into today's topic, I'm really excited about this. And this is something I've wanted to do an episode on for a while because I think protecting our calendars and the whole aspect of scheduling meetings, especially in our very virtual world, so much of the meetings are online where we're doing them from our home. And it can be easy to end up wasting a lot of time still with these types of meetings when we're not being intentional. So I have 7 different strategies for you here. And to start, meetings, whether they're in person, Zoom, like I was just saying, phone calls, whether they're with your clients, your team members, with potential clients, maybe it's a podcast interview or a like coffee date with a friend, whatever it is. All of these meetings take time, energy, and effort, and they take away from the deep work we do in our business. And I think meetings are totally necessary. For example, like that, like I just said, meeting with like a client, like, yes, that is totally necessary. But the more meetings you have, the more it takes you away from the deep work that really moves the needle forward in our projects and in our business. So I have had weeks in my business where there were simply too many meetings, and I had too many meetings not close together where it's like they're just all spread out throughout the week, and it truly can ruin your productivity. So I'm talking about how to prevent that here. But to like give you an example, what I mean by that is like, say you have a meeting at 9 a.m. that's an hour long. And then after that, you have an hour and a half-ish gap. And then you have another meeting at 11:30, then a 1 hour gap, then another. And then the next day you have one meeting smack dab in the middle of the workday. Before you know it, your work days all look like working for basically in 1 hour increments in between meetings, or even like 30-minute increments between meetings. And you get to that place when you're not protecting and being intentional with your calendar and what you're going to allow to be scheduled on it. So I have been there lately, especially as a new mom, where I've been more hesitant to load up days with meetings. So I've had times where I feel like I'm struggling to get deep work in because maybe there's too many meetings spread out too widely over multiple days. Things like that. So it's something really to again, be intentional about and pay attention to. So I'm going to give you right now my best calendar management tips. I started out with having only 3 and I actually have 7 now because I thought of a few more to add. Some of these you might already be doing. Some maybe you're intending to do, like I was just saying, but then you start to kind of not do as frequently as you should. And then some are maybe ones you've literally never thought of. So let's dive in. Number 1, decide days and times where you simply do not take any work meetings, period, no matter what. So I believe that in order to be really productive in our businesses, you need entire days of the week, every single week, where there are 0 meetings so you can really dive into projects with more focus and kind of shut everything else down. So when you don't do this, you're kind of just letting everyone else's stuff take over your time. Basically, if you're always available and you're always reacting to everyone else's requests, you don't ever get to put yourself and your business first. So that's why I think having just days and times where you're like, I don't take meetings is a really great place to start in this protecting our calendars mentality. So you probably are already doing this a little bit. Like, for example, I would bet most of you on an average week are not taking meetings for your business after 5 p.m. You also likely don't take work meetings on the weekends unless it's totally necessary. Things like that. Like you have some guidelines, or maybe you do have to take work meetings on a weekend because you're meeting with a potential wedding photography client and that's the only time they can meet, something like that. But then maybe you have another day you don't take meetings. So that's something we all typically have in place, but I would recommend taking a step further and slimming it down to some particular days and times that are the only times you take meetings, and know that it can change every week if it needs to. So maybe it's at the beginning of every week, you're looking at that week's calendar and evaluating, okay, what are the 2 days this week I'm going to take meetings, and what are the 3 days that are going to be deep work days? And that might be a different number for you. For me, I feel like 2 days a week of having meetings and 3 days with no meetings is very ideal for me. And again, I'm talking about work meetings too. So something like personal in the evening would be different than that, but figure out what works for you. And I would say just decide on days and times where you're this is always a thing, or it can change week to week, but you're I don't take work meetings then. That way you're not looking at your week and doing that example I talked about where you have a million meetings, throughout the week, but causing you to only get to work in 1 hour intervals. Okay, and the second tip, this kind of carries on from what I just shared, but trying to batch meetings. So we all hear about batch work. I'm sure you're familiar with it. The idea of kind of doing things together so you can get into the zone for that type of work versus kind of all day long, kind of being I'm in the inbox. Now I'm outlining a podcast. Now I'm working on a client project. Now I'm on a phone call, staying in the zone with something. So we can do that for meetings. And this would look like saying that maybe there are 1 to 3 days a week that you take meetings. And during those days, there's only specific times that you're doing the meetings, and you don't do meetings outside of that unless absolutely necessary. So this really allows for that deep work I was talking about. But also things like you only having to get super ready for the day on those days. If you're like me and maybe you prefer to work makeup free in a t-shirt and shorts and not having to get super ready every day with your hair stuff in a ponytail, it really allows you to kind of do that, get ready all the way on those days and not on other days. And if you're more introverted, it also allows you to only have to go really all the way extroverted in your business on those days. So I really like doing this, the batch meeting concept. And yes, just to note, things come up. So for example, say that Monday is one of those days that you're that is a day I don't take meetings. but then you get asked to be on a podcast and that Monday is their batch meeting day. Then what I would do in that situation, I have this happen for me all the time, I would flex that week. And that goes back to what I was saying, number one of like this thing kind of change week to week, but flex that week and switch up your own batch days. So maybe now for that particular week, you're going to take another meeting on a Monday, and then Tuesday, which is typically your meeting day, you're doing meeting free. So my best tip on this one is simply to try it out this current week or the next, whatever makes sense for you, and get out your calendar. Interrupting this episode with a suggestion for the small business owners listening. Ever wonder what you should do for healthcare when you and your spouse are both self-employed, so there's no work-provided health insurance to participate in? Well, when my husband Adam joined me in the entrepreneurial job space over 4 years ago, we joined Christian Healthcare Ministries instead of getting traditional health insurance. And it was the best decision for us, especially in these years of growing and raising a family while also running multiple businesses. CHM is a health cost-sharing ministry and is a faith-based alternative to health insurance. We did tons of research before choosing CHM, and if you know me and Adam, you know we are all about doing the math when making big or small financial decisions. And even though it's not insurance, CHM shares 100% of eligible medical bills, which is more than the typical 70 or 80% of medical bills paid for by insurance companies. All sharing is determined by the CHM guidelines, which you can check out before and after joining. And for the mamas and mamas to be listening, you truly cannot find a better healthcare option for maternity care. I had a vaginal delivery and a C-section and birth center care and hospital care between my 2 pregnancies and births, and it was all 100% shared for. And outside of birth, we've had our share of emergency room visits and procedures as a family, and those costs were all shared by members at Christian Healthcare Ministries, leaving us only paying our monthly contribution. CHM is less expensive month to month than insurance, and because there's no network, you can choose your care with whichever providers best fit your family. I seriously just cannot recommend Christian Healthcare Ministries enough. You've got to check them out. Go to elizabethmccravy.com/CHM for more information. Also putting that link in the show notes, elizabethmccravy.com/CHM. Now back to the episode. Before anyone has scheduled anything on it, which we're going to talk about next, but like say you have a blank calendar for the week, and go ahead and block off 2 or 3 work days that are going to be meeting free and just see what happens. See where that takes you productivity wise to really like quit wasting time and be in control of your own calendar. So for example, to look at my own calendar from this particular week as an example, I had 2 meetings on a Tuesday, and a podcast interview and a team meeting on that day. And then if anyone else wants to schedule something with me this week, that afternoon would have been a good option. And then let's say I know I also need to schedule a one-on-one meeting with 2 different team members. I may open up Wednesday morning for that so that I can get, Tuesday's a meeting day, Wednesday morning some meetings, and then I'm done and on to deep work. That can look really, really nice and allow you a lot of freedom to get that deep work done. I know I keep saying deep work over and over again, but I feel like that is, again, so key to like getting time in to grow your business and not just be answering to everyone else's stuff. Okay, third tip. Now we're going to talk about a little bit of scheduling stuff. So use something like Calendly to let people schedule meetings with you based on your own availability. So whether it's a podcast interview, a one-on-one meeting with a team member, a potential client discovery call, whatever it is, like I cannot emphasize enough, use the gift technology has given us of scheduling tools that get rid of that back and forth of choosing a date and time and allow you just to be like, here's when I'm available, make it in your own time zone, and let's get this on the calendar. For me, I use Calendly. I love Calendly. I've literally used it since the early days of my business. I like it for this particular aspect because you can create different calendars and make availability for yourself. And it's not directly tied to booking clients. So Dubsado also does calendar scheduling, which I also have used and also love. But if you're looking for something like a tool for scheduling podcast interviews, or meetings with a team member or job interviews and things like that, and you don't really want it directly tied to your leads in your business, something like Calendly is going to be really good. And they also have a free version, which I'm on the free version. And I've actually been on the free version since 2019. I looked when I was outlining this episode, I'm like, wow, I've been using the free version a long time. So there's really no reason not to do this is my point. So you can create, to kind of explain how Calendly works and all these kinds of tools, you can create different calendars and you make availability for yourself. Literally, you can say like, Tuesdays I'm available 9 to 3, Wednesdays I'm not available at all, like whatever you want to do. And you can update it as often as you want. You can let people schedule out a whole month in advance, a week in advance, whatever you want there. And then when they go to schedule, they see it in their time zone, which is how we're cutting it out on the like, you're on Eastern, I'm on Mountain. Like, how do we like translate the time? You don't have to do that anymore. And you can also ask questions when someone signs up to schedule the meeting with you. So you could ask them to like, enter their website address, tell what the meeting's about, whatever you want to ask there. And you can also sync it up with Zoom so that it automatically creates an event there. You can basically send someone the link to the calendar and then they schedule it with you and it's done. So again, this takes out the time zone issues of you guys translating between your time zones. It takes out back and forth, even if you're on the same time zone. So it's worth it. You will save time. And I want to tell you actually what my Calendly calendars are that I use most often right now. I have some like turned on and off as needed, which is how I'm on the free version. But tell you my calendars and to give you some ideas for different ones you might would want to use. I have one for one-on-one team meetings. And I use this whenever I'm needing to let a team member schedule a meeting with me. And again, it automatically makes us a Zoom meeting, which I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But that's a really awesome thing. So I send the link to my calendar. These are automatically set to be 1 hour long, which you can vary up the lengths of all of these, which is nice. I also have one for job interviews for when I'm hiring and ready to do that interview. And I would send this calendar to the candidate and ask them to schedule their interview. I have one for podcast interviews for this show. I have one for discovery calls with potential clients, and that's one's a shorter one. So that one's more like 20 or 30 minutes, whereas the other three I just said are more like an hour. One-on-one client meetings is another great calendar to have. And yeah, so those are all my main ones. And some of those I haven't been actively using lately, but the ones I am using, I keep up to date with my availability and I send it to the right person when I need them to schedule with me. And this one too, I would say use your calendar as much as needed. So for example, say you get asked to be on someone's podcast and they don't use a system like this, which is totally fine. Some people don't. It's definitely preferred if you do, but some people don't. You could send them back your calendar and ask them to pick a time instead of doing the whole emailing back and forth about when's available. Just ask them, hey, would you actually be comfortable just scheduling this interview on my calendar? And then I can, join at your link or whatever instead of the link it creates. But that way y'all can cut back on the back and forth. It'll save you both a ton of time. So really love that. And there's a ton of different systems. I use Calendly, and Dubsaw is another one I would recommend as well, depending on what you're using it for. Okay, number 4, and this one really pulls from what I just said as well, but always download the meeting invitation from any meetings you're doing and add it to your Apple or Google Calendar. So another calendar management tip, seriously, just add every single event to your calendar. Whether or not you're doing the whole like scheduling your whole day on a calendar thing or not, it doesn't matter. Having events on your calendar where you can get the reminder for it, easily click the link when it's time to join, not forget it and double schedule yourself, going to be super helpful. And if you use Calendly or Dubsado, you can actually sync it to your calendar and those events will automatically go onto your calendar and remind you to join it 10 minutes before or whatever amount of time before you want to set it to. It's awesome. So like for all those calendars I was just saying, I'm never like when someone schedules something, I'm never saying like, okay, let me go input that into my calendar. Like literally it's just automatically on there within a few minutes of them scheduling it, which again is awesome. And if you've listened to my podcast any amount of time, you've heard me talk about calendaring so much. I'm all about it and about digital calendar specifically. And I use Apple Calendar for reference. iCalendar, I guess is what you call it. And I have for years and I love it. Some people prefer Google Calendar or other ones, and those are all great too. But put your meetings on there. Again, even if you're not using it to schedule other parts of your day, having that on there as like a guideline to see where you can fit in other work and help you plan your week is going to be awesome. And it takes some of the headache and guesswork out of meetings. It will make it easier to schedule in that deep work because you're able to clearly see when you do and when you don't have meetings. All right. Number 5, you don't have to say yes to every opportunity and every meeting request. I'll keep this one short, and this is harder than it seems. And as I say that, you might be like, of course, Elizabeth, everyone knows that. I personally feel like I've been told that and I've known that tip forever of people saying like, don't say yes to every opportunity. Don't stretch yourself too thin. Everyone knows it, right? But in the moment, it is sometimes so hard to say no to things. And as our business grows, it can become harder to say no to things. Like maybe early on, there's less requests and it makes more sense to say yes to more things. And then that discipline of like really thinking about what to say yes and no to comes as your business grows. So things to think about though, protecting your calendar. Also is sometimes protecting time with your family, protecting the growth of your own business and protecting your mental health. Saying no to things can be protecting all of those things. And a meeting here and there that like you're not really sure you have time for, you're not really sure is necessary, can quickly become more than a meeting here and there when you're constantly just saying yes to everything. So when you're asked to do something like speak at an event, to be a guest on a podcast, to do another online summit or one of those like course bundle things, or just any other types of obligations like a coffee chat or a pick your brain call with someone, just so you don't have to say yes, it's okay to say no. And people will respect you for saying no when you say no well and clearly, and just tell them like, hey, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for reaching out. I don't have time for this in my business right now, but thank you for thinking of me. And again, as your business grows, you have to protect your time. And early on, it's easier to say yes to more things because there's less things to say yes or no to. But being disciplined about this, even early on, is going to help you in the long run. For example, in my own business, it's crazy to think about this, but I have never said yes to one of those online summit things. And I'm not saying I'll never say yes to those or that's bad to say yes to them if you do. Maybe at some point I'll find one. I'll be like, yes, I want to say yes to that. But at least in the last 6 years of my business, I've always found those requests to not be worth it. And I'd rather focus my efforts and my energy on things in my own business. So typically when I get those requests, it's like an easy no. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have to pass on that. I also don't say yes to like pick my brain types of calls or meetings. And I'm pretty sure I've never said yes to those. So it's okay to say no to those. Don't tell yourself otherwise. You're not being mean. You have to decide what to say yes or no to. And your yes is going to be different than my yes and different than your other business friends. And it may also be different in different seasons of your business. So for me right now, my season of working part-time basically and being like in total mom mode the other half the time leads me to protect my calendar a lot more. So right now, any meetings I'm taking are typically meetings with my team members or podcast interviews, which I've done a lot of podcast interviews lately on other shows. Definitely come over to Instagram because I always share whenever one of those airs, but I've really enjoyed that lately. I literally actually right before recording this was on a podcast interview with someone that I'm really excited for that to air. And it was a really fun interview. So I love that. And that's what I'm focusing on this season though. So for me, a request to be on someone's podcast is a definitely yes, but a request to do something like a joint webinar or a summit or maybe even a speaking event is a no. So you have to know what it is for your current season. And again, your season might be different than mine. My seasons are going to change. That's just what it is right now. So protecting your calendar, huge key is not saying yes to everything. And my last two tips are a bit shorter. Number 6 is don't overbook yourself. So that goes back to like not saying yes to everything. But what I mean in particular with not overbooking yourself, I don't mean like holistically. I mean like literally a day at a time. But know your limits, and you'll be able to discover this pretty quickly as you start having meetings in your business. But know your limits as to how many meetings you can handle in a single day and a single week from an output perspective. So it's just natural that the longer you work and maybe the farther into the day you go, you get less productive, less at your like top level. So maybe for you, you realize that you kind of cap out at like 3 1-hour meetings in a day. Like that's the most you can do and still show up as your best self. Or maybe you're someone that's like, yeah, you're one of those people that can batch like 8 podcast interviews in a day and like get it all knocked out at once. That's great too. Everyone is different. Everyone's personality is different in that way. And I would say instead of like looking to advice of like what I do or what someone else does, just look at your own self and how your energy is when you're doing things like meetings, whether they're in person or on Zoom or whatever, and figure out how many meetings make sense for you in a day day in this season of your life. And back to stuff like Calendly, you can literally limit it to not let it be more than a certain number of meetings a day scheduled and things like that. You can protect your calendar to not let it get to be too many meetings. So know your own limits. For me, I've tried at times to be one of those people that batches like a ton of podcast interviews in a day, and I can't do it. Like, at least not at this point in my life. I get too exhausted, and kind of by the end of it, I feel like I'm not able to ask questions as well, and I'm just tired. And I'm more introverted too, so I'm more likely to want to spread out a little bit more, like spread out the meetings over more weeks and less meetings in a day. I think 3 or 4 meetings in a day is kind of a max for me. And I can do meetings more back to back. And I actually think I prefer that, so that I would, going back to what we were talking about earlier, of not just having like little 1-hour chunks to work, but instead like knocking out all the meetings and then going to do work on my own. So know your own limits and don't overbook yourself. And my final tip, number 7, respect your own calendar and other people's calendars. This is a very important in running a successful business and just being a good person to have meetings with. So I think what that looks like is like not overbooking yourself is one way where you can respect your own calendar. And then with meetings, whether it's something you scheduled or someone else scheduled with you, be on time. And when you schedule something, do your best to hold to it. And when you aren't on time, when you miss the meeting, whatever it is, like that's life and life happens, but apologize, own up to it, and try to like hold yourself to that accountability of like, when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Even just like in a self-accountability way, and knowing that not everything is ever going to happen perfectly. Like, for example, I feel like I'm pretty good at maintaining my calendar, at staying on schedule, at being on time, if not always early for meetings, whether they're in person or online. But literally yesterday, so I told you guys just now that today I recorded a podcast interview with someone. Yesterday was when the meeting was scheduled, and it was just my total bad. I had the meeting time wrong. Even though she used Calendly, even though it got added to my calendar, in my head, I was thinking it was an hour later than it was, and I missed the notification telling me it was time to join. I think it actually might have not sent me a notification, but I missed it. And so she was ready to interview me, and I did not show up for our meeting. I felt awful. And owned up to that and was like, I will quickly reschedule with you whenever you're available. If we need to just cancel it, we can. If you need to reschedule a month out, if you want to reschedule the next morning, I will, which is what we ultimately did. But that's a time to not just be like, oh, whoopsie, whatever, but instead to own up to it, apologize, and be really accommodating for like making up that meeting and doing your best to like make right by missing something like that. So, and if you want people to respect your calendar, you have to do that for others. So things happen though, which is why I tell you that example of something literally like we're talking about happening for me yesterday, me just straight up missing a meeting when I thought I was scheduling everything so nicely. Stuff like that happens. So that's it, guys. Those are my 7 strategies to protect your calendar and schedule meetings like a pro and quit wasting time with meetings. And I hope these help you. And of all of these, if you're thinking like, okay, I love these tips, Elizabeth, but where should I start? I would say start by stopping taking meetings on everyone else's schedule and make your own schedule that you are in control of, that you take meetings based on. Using something like Calendly, that's a great place to start. And stopping taking meetings just anytime and really being like, these are the days I take meetings. These are the days I don't. And y'all, there's not have to be that much like special thought put into it. It could literally be as simple as you pick 2 random days of the week. Like it doesn't have to be some crazy thought out thing. And then say no to more things to give yourself deep work days where you don't need to meet with anyone and you can just wear your hair in a high ponytail and wear a sweatshirt and leggings all day. Enjoy the beauty of entrepreneurship and working from home life by not having to get ready every day. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one, and please share with any other business friends who you're like, they could use these scheduling tips. And I'd love to hear from you over on Instagram if there's like one of these things in particular that you're going to try, or maybe something you do that I didn't mention that would be a good tip to share in the future. So hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye for now. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast and all the way until the end. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, then I want to encourage you to check out my website where you'll find tons of resources to help you grow a profitable and sustainable business. Over on ElizabethMcCravy.com, you'll find free workbooks to help you figure out things like the best headline for your sales page. There's a freebie with my favorite journal prompts to start your day with, a guide on website essentials for all you coaches, and so much more. And you'll find my top business tools. Yes, I literally list out all the major ones for you on my website, and there are tons of special discounts and offers for you guys to snag as you try these products and services. You'll also find the main ways to work with me. First, through my Showit website template shop that helps you DIY your way to a strategic website for your business. These website templates are easy to use, they're gorgeously designed, and they have all the strategy I'm teaching on this podcast just woven into them, and I have a feeling you'll really love them. You'll also find my course and coaching program for designers, Booked Out Designer. In this program, I teach you everything I did to build an in-demand design business so that you can create a thriving business for yourself as a brand or website designer. So if all of that interests you, go to ElizabethMcCravy.com. To access those tools and free downloads, head to the tools page at ElizabethMcCravy.com/tools. And to see the different ways to work with me, simply click over to the Ways to Work Together page. I hope you have so much fun exploring everything over there. And don't forget that you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. And leaving a rating and review for the show, sharing it with a friend, sharing it on social media are all great ways for you to support this podcast. Thanks so much, and I'll see you again next week.